created to oppress several groups of people. I hope you know, and if you don't, well, you're about to find out. Remember, there are no accidents, only presidents. And for those who don't know what the word presidents means, it means to rank or to order something or someone according to superiority on purpose. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. All of this is done on purpose. So I want to ask a question to everybody, and just thinking, what is systematic racism? After the last meeting, a guy by the name of Craig came up to me and he asked me, Linnell, how do we stop white supremacy? How do we stop racism? And I thought to myself, I'm like, all right, I got to first explain what systematic racism is. This is the problem that I want to attack. This is the problem that we should all want to attack. I want to explain that it's different from personal racism that we've come to know, like hearing the N word or someone telling an insensitive joke. Today, I want to really explain what systematic racism is and how it's affected African Americans. But first, let's start with a thought experiment. Everybody think quietly. If you were white, how much money would you pay to be black? And if you're black, how much would you pay to be white? I ask this question just so we can visualize the difference. So for me to explain systematic racism, I must first break down the four institutions of racism. And the first one is slavery. Most historians agree that slavery chained African Americans to servitude and it chained white people to ownership. Not every white person, just richer white people to ownership. This is a proven fact. Even within our society today, in almost every workforce across America, you'll see African Americans aren't in ownership positions. Now, if you look at a successful organization that have created countless black millionaires, which is the NFL, you'll see that 73% of the players are black, but 0% of the owners are black. It's not because black people are bad at business or we simply are worse at making money. It's because the institution of systematic racism, it has chained us to servitude and not ownership. Black people just are generally the worker and not the owner. This is a result of slavery affecting even the richest, most African Americans across the country. And remember, it's not done by accident, but precedent. A black man by the name of Colin Kaepernick took a NFL team to the Super Bowl. He didn't beat his wife, he didn't kill anybody, he didn't murder anybody, and now he can't find a job simply because he took a knee. And so if he can't find a job now, do you think it's crazy to think that African Americans can't become an ownership of an NFL team? Because they all have to vote. Every NFL owner has to vote if they want to allow someone to purchase a team. And so if they can conspire against one man, they certainly can aspire. They certainly can conspire against all of them. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a simple observation. The second institution of racism is Jim Crow. And for those who don't know what Jim Crow is, it's the laws that were created after the Civil War in 1865. And these laws lasted about 245 years, which is the segregation of buses, trains, schools, neighborhoods, bathroom. Almost every public institution was segregated and not equal just because of Jim Crow. And we can't truly understand the impact of Jim Crow if we don't know how it first arrived. You see, slavery was abolished in 1865 with the 13th Amendment. And for those who don't know what the 13th Amendment is, it is in the Constitution, the same laws that provide you the right to remain silent or to not imprison yourself, which is the Fifth Amendment, the same laws that give you the right to bear arms or freedom of speech. This is in the Constitution. This is still here today. It was written in 1865. It reads, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, shall exist within the United States. Now, if any of you heard the loophole that is written into this law, except as a punishment of crime. You see, this is a remarkable law because on one hand, while it abolishes slavery from any regular old white person to purchase slaves and control people, it now basically changes slavery into a punishment of crime that will be controlled by the state. So, this is something that is a problem. This is something that we need to really focus on and understand that instantly, literally, when slavery was abolished, instantly the freedom of African Americans was conditional. You're free, but you better not get caught doing anything. We better not falsely accuse you of doing anything because instantly you will be put right back into slavery. This is not my opinion. This is literally how the Constitution describes it. It describes the prison system as the evolution of the slave plantation. Now, I want y'all to remember that this law was put in place right after Africans were free. So they didn't have a home to go to. They weren't hired by anybody. The United States government offered every slave 40 acres and a mule, but the promise wasn't kept, and only 2% of all Africans that were slaves received that. So very few people received almost payment for their work, and it really wasn't that. There was nothing for these newly freed people. So many of them turned back to their masters to work for low wages. Many of them died. Many of them were falsely accused and put back into prison, which I just explained is another form of slavery because that's literally how the Constitution describes it. So to connect all this information that I just provided for you guys, basically slavery oppressed black people, obviously, and then it evolved into the prison system. And there were thousands of white people who were working the slave patrol, and that turned into the modern day police force that we know today. It hindered Africans from economic gain, it hindered Africans from educational gain, job opportunities, etc. And now they look at Negroes, even to this day, like we're crazy if we ask for reparations. Indians got reparations, Jews got reparations, both rightfully so. But literally, the people who built this country for free, the people who built the White House today that everybody's president lives in, was built for free and was built by slaves. And we just ask for just simple payment today and even back then, equality. It isn't to get rid of the white people or white class or anything. It's equality. It's fairness for everybody. So the third institution of racism is black neighborhoods. Black ghettos aren't simply an urban area where hip hop comes from. But ask yourself, why are there black neighborhoods? The black ghetto is literally the result of Jim Crow, which is segregation. The black ghetto wasn't created by accident, but precedent. Why do you think they call it the projects? Because it's literally that, a project. And when you have the project, that things happen that you may not quite predict. And so what the projects did is it helped ruin the black family, take the fathers out of the home and promote welfare. Now black women have the idea that they don't need a man. So now the black women that think that, I want you to know that you absolutely do not need a man. You guys are the most powerful, you guys are the most beautiful, you guys are the most strong, you guys help us, you guys literally help put a man on the moon, and so let's just give a round of applause for black women. And so y'all don't need men, but as an African American man like himself is, yes, we need y'all, so I just want y'all to know that out there. And then you can apply this to any race, any gender, whatever the case may be, whatever is important to you, apply that to it. So now that you have all this adversity going on in the black home, in the black family, a black boy and girl, their only reference to a real relationship is dysfunction. The only reference to a real relationship is dysfunction. Now that mom is working all the time to provide for the children and daddy is in jail, flood the streets with crack cocaine. So these underprivileged children who have no supervision is encouraged to try it. The only role models that these kids have are athletes and entertainers who has to pander to both sides of every issue because if they don't, their paychecks will stop. Every Trayvon Martin, every Philando Castile that is murdered in cold blood because they were LWB, living while black in the ghetto, could have easily been the next Martin Luther or Barack Obama, etc., etc. The crime rates are always the highest in the lowest classes. Tupac said, while middle-class white people are waiting on legislation to pass, black people are right next door to the kill. James Baldwin once said, if any white man stands up and says, give me liberty or give me death, he is applauded and is seen as a patriot, as someone who holds up the Constitution. But when a black man says the same thing, word for word, he is looked at as a criminal, or he has a victim mentality, or he hates America, and that couldn't be further from the truth. When I took a knee, or when I sat for the pledge, for the anthem, whatever, it had nothing to do with hatred. It had nothing to do with stubbornness. It was because I love this country so much, I'm willing to be uncomfortable for a little while to bring awareness to a problem that I think needs to be handled. and that's what it's all about. We're just bringing awareness to a problem that really needs to be handled. But when anyone looks into their hearts and they ask themselves, what do they really want for the world? It's for peace, love, happiness, and it's for all lives to matter. But it's simply impossible until Black ones do. The fourth institution of racism, I thought it might have been the prison system, but when I thought about it, slavery and the prison system is very similar. They're the same thing. It's why Black people make up 13% of the United States, but nearly 50% of the prison population, and are killed are killed by police officers disproportionately. The actual fourth institution of racism is for the people among communities that are empowered to not know Black and brown truth. And I like to talk about Black and brown truth really quick. I was walking around campus and I realized that the people in power here, even on this campus, they have the luxury of not knowing Black and brown truth. And this doesn't apply to everybody. This doesn't apply to everybody, but it's definitely a luxury to not have to know Black and brown truth. I'm not saying that white people are racist or insensitive or Black bad people. I think they generally have good hearts. I'm saying that white people don't know Black and brown truth because they aren't tested on it. That they aren't tested on it. What happens to a white person if they don't know what people of color experience? Virtually nothing. But what happens if people of color don't know white history, white culture, white literature, white drama, etc.? I know we don't call it that, but that's sort of the point. We don't call it that because when your things are already the norm, you don't have to label it. So for those who are wondering why we don't have a White History Month, we do. We have several. They go by the tricky names of June, July, August, September. But it's taken for granted because white people don't have to know other people's history or culture, and that's an advantage. That's a privilege. But there's a flip side to all of this. There's good white people here now who recognize that systematic racism is real and it hurts people of color. But what some of you won't recognize is that for every Black or brown person who was targeted, there is someone who is not being targeted. And for those people who are generally not being targeted are awarded a privilege. It has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with your living circumstances, where you are in life, where you come from. It's being awarded a privilege. Of not having to deal with certain issues, not having to believe in certain issues. See, even us Black folks fail to victim. Even us Black folks fall victim to speaking on the down as if there is no up. But you see, down is a relative term. There can be no down without up. And we must ask those who are up to not only empathize with us, but to please acknowledge that the down exists, systematic racism exists. The first step to solving a problem is acknowledging that it exists in the first place. The new racism is denying that racism exists. And I want to close with a quote from Martin Luther King. Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. If we all love freedom the way we say we do, this isn't even an argument, and we can all come together and love each other. All right, I'd like to call up one more person, Asia. I think you wanted to speak. I'm gonna just give her an introduction. She's very strong. She